Good. So welcome to OTF Connect's Inquiry and the Struggling Student with Aviva Dunziger. And I welcome all of you as well from across the province. And I'm going to turn off my mic now, and I'm going to let Aviva take over. So welcome, Aviva.
Thank you very much, Susan, and that was a great intro, and you definitely did get my name right. First of all, I'm going to apologize. I have a terrible cold and a bit of a cough, so I have some water beside me. I'm hoping that I'll be okay tonight with it, but if I start to cough, I do apologize. I'm glad to have everyone here. It is a very different environment to be talking online versus doing a presentation in person. So I love the communication back and forth to kind of give me a feel of what you're thinking and any questions and things that you have. So please feel free to always add questions, comments, ideas in the chat. This is just a snapshot of some of the things that have worked with me, but and have worked in some of the different grades and some of the different schools that I've taught at. But I get new ideas from every person that I talk to and every different person that I communicate with. So I certainly welcome different ideas from all of you because I know there's lots of people in the room with some different ideas as well. My name is Aviva Dunziger, and I do definitely like to share online. I tweet quite often, but I also blog a lot, and you'll see, and Susan just put it into the chat box, some links to the different blogs. So just for kind of interest, in case you want to go and have a look at some of these later, the top blog, adunziger.com, is my professional blog. It's where I kind of reflect on my professional practices, and I usually do write a few blog posts there a week, sometimes more than that. In the midst of report card writing season, I've been down a little bit. The second blog on the list, missdunziger.com, is the grade 1 class blog that I used last year with my students. And I did share a lot of the things that were happening in our grade 1 classroom last year, and some of those ideas are shared as part of these slides. So I wanted to include the link to that one. And the Davies K blog is the one that I'm using this year in our JKSK classroom. And while I am the one who does the posting, my partner and I work together on the different ideas and stuff that are shared through there. So I wanted to share that, and you'll see some of those ideas shared as well. Even though these are the blogs that I've kind of shared here, as part of the presentation, I have shared some different student blogs as well. And I have taught everything from kindergarten up to grade 6. So the ideas that are shared here are ones that kind of span those different grades, and hopefully we'll have some different ideas for you too, depending on the grade in which you're teaching. I would like to find out a little bit about that as well, so I'm going to be asking a bit about that. And if there's any questions that you have more specific to your grade when you see different examples, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will be looking at that too. So to start us off, I am trying to figure out what grade or what division you teach in, and while I've put them as divisions, if you want to indicate your grade as well, you can. So if you wanted to use the polling tool, and I think it will be switched to
yep, I'm going to switch that
poll. Perfect. Excellent. Then you can let me know what division you teach in, and if you want to put anything else as part of, if you want to put anything else as in the chat, that's great. The kindergarten videos, I'm so glad you like them, but I have to tell you, I am not behind them. Those are the brainchild of Annie White. Annie was on our autism spectrum disorders team for the board, and she's now gone back to teach kindergarten, and she did those videos with her daughter to help her students get ready, and she's been nice enough to share them, and I've posted them on the blog from her. So I definitely give all of the credit to her for sure, but she's definitely the one behind. Oh, it looks like we've got quite the nice mixture of people, which is awesome. All of the above, I'm guessing you're a prep coverage teacher, which is great. I don't know if she has any for grade 6, but she probably, with her experience there in in the autism team does have quite a combination of things for sure. Okay, so thank you everyone for putting down some of the grades that you teach in. It gives me a bit of an idea of where we're at. And as I said, as we go through these slides, if you have any questions or you want things geared a little bit more to your specific grades, please let me know. I see someone had said here about having a spec ed integrated into a regular class, ESL, all of that. So I'm hoping that some of these slides and ideas will touch on those, but if you want something more specific, please let me know. Okay, so this is the next part because I think it kind of joins into where we're going tonight. And how often do you use assistive technology in the classroom to support your learners? Okay. Perfect. Okay. So it seems like we have a bit of a combination here from the regularly, lots of sometimes, and then a not at all as well. And so hopefully this presentation does have a lot of different ideas when it comes to assistive tech, but also more of that universal design for learning. So even though it is assistive technology, how it's been used with all of the students, and maybe some things that you can think about with regards to that. And for people that are using assistive tech, I did just put in some different ideas, so if you have other ones, please feel free to either jump in on the microphone or jump in on the chat and share the ideas that you've used as well, because we can learn from those ideas too. Okay. So now gives you the chance, before I share some, to kind of get you looking a little bit at some of the things that you've used. So and you can do this in the chat if you want, or you can use the tool right on the toolbar, but what are some assistive technology options that you use in the classroom, and how do your students use them? Okay. For the person who wrote down about using Vocaroo, I'm just wondering if you find that the messages disappear really quickly, or if you find that they do manage to get them in on time. I don't know if you want to put more in the chat or if you wanted to add it there, but I was just curious to know, because anytime I've used Vocaroo before, I love it. It's super easy to use, and I've shared it with others as well. But I do find that the messages don't last long. Oh, Google Translate, iPad. When you use Vocaroo, Vocaroo doesn't stay around forever. So basically, usually within a couple of days, if you click the active link, it won't work anymore. And so that's the reason that there's some other tools that have similar types of things, like you could use a recording app on your iPad. You could use Audio Boo. I don't know if Susan has the link to Audio Boo. I know there's an app, and there's also the one that's available on the computer as well. Oh, sorry, I put in Audio Goo. It's Audio Boo. And one of the things, I think you can only record 5 minutes at a time for the free one. But it does last forever. So I do like it a little bit better than Vocaroo for that reason, although Vocaroo doesn't require a sign-in, which makes it really simple. Kurzweil. There's tons of ideas here.
Aviva, can I interrupt for a sec? I was just looking up Audio Boo to put the link in the chat, and I got Audio Boom, but not Audio Boo. Has Audio Boom taken over with an M on the end?
I haven't used it in a little while. I'm just wondering if it's the same. If it's a new version of the same one. It used to be like audio. Hold on. But I wonder if it's the same thing. Yeah. I'm trying to use a different device to get the same thing here, and I'm not doing very well. Maybe it is Audio Boom.
I think it sounds like it is. I put it in anyway.
Okay. Like there's lots of different ones. Like in all honesty, if you're using an iPad, any of the recording apps would do the same thing because Audio Boo or Vocaroo, they're not changing the audio to text. They're just recording an audio file, right? So any recording app that you have will work exactly the same way. Like everyone has some comfort with various types of recording apps or whatever, but they do work in exactly the same way. So it's awesome. Like there's tons of ideas here. Some of the ones are ones that I will mention a little bit in upcoming slides. I've got a couple that are different, but because there's so many here that I haven't mentioned too, if you have other ideas related to the ones that you've mentioned that you want to put into the chat box later, this slide, will also be recorded and posted with everything else as well, so you'll be able to see it if you listen back to the Blackboard Collaborate session afterwards. You can get some ideas from there and hopefully can get some new ones if you haven't tried them before, too. The other thing is there are certain tools that seem to work, I think, a little bit better when you're dealing with some younger students versus some older ones. So that's where it's kind of playing around a little bit with what works best. Okay, so one of the things that I mentioned is something really straightforward, and you wouldn't necessarily even think of it in terms of assistive tech, but it is built into at least all the iPad minis or the newer ones, which is Siri and just the microphone that appears as part of your keyboard. And the link here with regards to Is It Writing, and I know that Susan will be putting that into the chat window, thanks Susan, as well, is this was a blog post that I wrote last year, and it was actually one that came up because of one of my students. So I was teaching grade 1, and one of the things is I love to have children write, and I like to have them write on their own, but I currently teach at a school which is an inner city school. I have a lot of struggling students. I had a lot last year as well, and the students are very limited in terms of what they can write, which means that not all of their ideas are being reflected as part of their writing. So for a long time, I did use kind of a writer's workshop model to try to get students to write more, and a little bit later on, I started to introduce some technology, and one of the things that I introduced was the My Story app, which is the picture that you see here, which is really a picture of a video that plays as part of the blog post as well. But one of the things that this particular student did is I had never showed them how to use Siri and the microphone for writing text, but he figured it out. And all of a sudden he realized that he could share a lot more of his thinking than what he was able to share when he was limited to what he could write on his own. And so it really got me thinking that when it comes to writing, sometimes even for either our big struggling student or sometimes even for a student who maybe even just by the nature of the grade they're in or because of a bunch of different circumstances are a little more limited when it comes to writing, when we can add either an audio feature, or in this case, where we can take their ideas and put it into text, there's value to it. And with something like Siri, as he figured out, he still needed to go back and reread what he wrote because not everything comes out perfectly. So there was also some value in that, and he was actually able to edit his work as well. So this is something that you don't have to download any apps for, which I love. It works really well. It's fairly consistent. And I do find as the iPads get newer and newer, and especially as the operating devices kind of improve, it's highly accurate. And I mean, I'm a huge writer and I write on my own all the time, but I will say that even when I'm writing emails after school and stuff like that, I do tend to use Siri to write it, and then I go back and proofread it. So it's something that works for me as an adult, and it's something that works for a number of students too. The other one was IWord queue. Now, word queue is what you can get as part of your computer. IWord queue is an app. It's not cheap. I think it's about $25, but it has highly predictable text patterns. It will read the work to you as you go, so there's a few different options as part of the screen. This was one that somebody else had mentioned as well when it came to assistive tech. I find it really easy. I've used it with everyone down to grade 1, and I've used it up to grade 6 in the public board, and then when I've worked with some students privately, I've used it up to grade 8. So you could probably use it past then. I mean, it's very straightforward. It's easy to save. I also like because it will read back text to you. You can highlight it and have it read, and it tends to read punctuation as well. So it can be really, really helpful when it comes to it can be really helpful when it comes to even proofreading work, that people can hear how it sounds. I haven't used Google Read and Write a lot. I think that there's a lot of overlapping features from what I know. I'm not sure. We have some assistive technology people as part of our board, and they're really good to they're really good to go to, and they can offer some ideas in terms of what might be the better option based on your students. I don't know if anyone else in here has used it more, so can offer a better comparison. What I mean when it reads punctuation is that it knows to stop at the periods. It tends to pause when there's a comma. So when you're hearing it back, you're actually hearing it as it would sound to somebody else, which means that if your child hasn't put any periods anywhere in the sentence at all, so it's just like a whole stream of text, it's going to sound like that when it reads it back to them. And so it gives them a little bit of an idea in terms of going back to edit what they may need to do and when things don't sound right. The other one is Dragon Dictation, and this one was also mentioned too. I do find with Dragon Dictation that it is something that seems to work better for some students than for others. So it's you've got to see. For some, I find that Siri actually was a better option to use than Dragon. This particular student, he really liked using it. Now he had the app on his iPhone as well as on an iPad, and he found the iPhone worked better. So again, it does vary. Versus the one that you have on the computer one is more accurate, but the students need to be trained on it. It can be a little more frustrating. The app is easy to use and doesn't need to be trained, but it's not necessarily as accurate. So it does vary back and forth. But I do find, especially when you're trying to get students to write, when you have a reluctant writer, and this is a good example of a student that was a very reluctant writer, the fact that he could use Dragon allowed him to get some writing down. So it meant that when you're trying with inquiry, often you're trying to get students to produce some kind of written text at the end, or you're trying to get them to write down ideas that they might have taken from research. This is a very easy way for them to do so, and with using maybe the same tool that they're even researching on, they can go back and forth from their internet into Dragon. They can email the notes back and forth, so it does work. It does need a quiet space, which is true. Now, I don't know, because I never really tried it. I happened to have a pod the year that I used this, and so the pod was quite quiet, and often the student would go out into the pod, and even when we've used Siri last year, I had a student sit at the door where it was a little quieter, or students figured out areas in the room where there was less noise, and they used that too. But I wonder if you could even use a plug-in microphone into your iPad, and because it's a headset microphone, if it might block out a little bit of the additional noise, and that might work. I never tried it, but I wonder if it would. Thank you to the person who's sharing about about the Google Read and Write. There's lots of ideas that are going back and forth here, so I just wanted to thank the person at the time. But these are all little things too that you might want to try to figure out in terms of what works. yes, the Smartboard thing too, thank you, Arifa, for mentioning that. It can be recorded, and I have used that one as well. Now, what I did find is that when I was trying to record the Smartboard, the stuff on the screen using the notebook software, it actually produces quite a large file. And so depending on how long it was going to be, it created a file that was really hard to deal with afterwards. But if I often used a screen capturing tool like Jing, or there's one by TechSmith as well. Like there's different screen capturing tools that you might be able to use where you can do the same thing. You can still record on top of the screen, but it's just a little bit of a smaller. It's a little bit of a smaller file, which helps. I just wanted to make a comment. Thanks, Stephanie. You're mentioning a little bit with regards to the technology about the value and showing everyone how to use it, and it kind of decreases the stigma and stuff as well. I know this particular year when I taught grade 5, and I would say the same was true for grade 1 as well. Students would start to show each other how they were using these tools, and even students that didn't necessarily need to use the tool used it because it might have been a little bit easier. It might have been a quicker way to get their ideas down, or they might have been able to share more, and then they could really help each other, but they didn't mind the fact that they were using it because they knew that their peers were using it as well. And I think there is a lot of value in creating that comfortable environment where everyone feels like they can use the tools that they need, and even as adults where we can share how we might be using some similar tools. As I said, I mean, I can certainly type out emails and stuff too, but I definitely do write a lot of my emails using Siri because I do find it faster and more productive for me, and I can get the ideas down and then just go back and edit it. I know a teacher friend of mine who actually writes her learning skills comments for report cards using Siri, and then she copies and pastes them in, and then she edits them from there, and she finds she's able to be a lot more personal in the comments and write them a lot faster with the use of that tool. So there is value for some of this assistive technology for all students, not just necessarily for students that we might expect need it. Explain Everything is another wonderful tool that works well for all students, but certainly allows certain students that may need it. They can get their ideas down. They can do so orally, they can do so in writing, or they can use a combination of different ones. Now, there's a ton of screencasting tools. Explain Everything is just one of them, and there were some other ones that were mentioned back on the other slide as well. ScreenChop is another one. Educreations is one. That they all do similar things. Our board happens to be using Explain Everything as part of a project that we're doing right now, and so as such, this was the one I taught to my students because if they're starting to use it now, they will be using it as they move up in the grades too. It is quite straightforward, and one of the things I like about it is that it's easy to share afterwards. So you could make one and you can upload it as a video, you can put it onto Google Drive and share it with people too. And even for students who maybe can write a little bit but are able to explain so much more, they can then go back and they can add to their ideas through what they're explaining for something like Explain Everything. And I just realized here that I'm missing like a whole bunch of stuff because I was up a little bit, so I'm hoping I got everything here. And I am totally a huge believer that what is good for some is good for all, especially when it comes to something like some of these assistive tools. And I love the fact that differentiation is almost built into some of these tools, as is the case with Explain Everything. Students can choose the way to share that works for them. For some students, it might be through writing in order to converse. For others, it might be through talking. For others, it might be through a combination of both. Some could take a picture of their work and then add to it through either talking on top, writing more, drawing something that shows their thinking. And when it comes to something like inquiry, we often hear that when students are sharing their thinking, they can do so in so many different ways. So why not use a tool like Explain Everything that actually builds that piece in where they can explain it in so many different ways. Here's just a little bit of an idea of an iPad versus computer options for things. And I did this because at the beginning of when we were kind of brainstorming some different ideas for some assistive technology options, some people mentioned things that do tend to work better on a computer versus on an iPad. And in my particular classroom, I have a combination of different devices. So I have some iPads, I have some Chromebooks, I have a desktop computer, and as such, I can't access exactly the same things. And so this happened to be a picture of something that I did last year with my grade 1s, and we were learning about worms because we had a vermicomposter in the classroom, and students were trying to find out a little bit more about vermicomposting and worms. And I found some really great resources, and the students had found some great resources to use, but they couldn't read all of them. And so we used a few different options, from a Chromebook option that allowed them to speak text versus an iPad option where it was just the speak part, which is just part of your assistive technology tools right from your settings, that allowed you to actually that allowed you to actually go back and read the text out as well from the iPad. So there are a few different options for there, and sometimes depending on what's available in your classroom, there's some value to having options for both and figuring out what some equivalent options may be. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about some assistive technology choices, and please, if you haven't had a chance, I know I've been trying to kind of read and talk at the same time, which is not the very best of options, but read back through the chat stuff because there's some great ideas that people have shared here. Someone here mentioned Seesaw. I haven't used Seesaw myself. The ESL teacher at our school, she has used it, and it's amazing. It works really well. What I've done is I've kind of used Explain Everything in a similar way to go back and talk again, but this is where you have to figure out what works well for you. So it's nice that people are sharing a few different ones because then maybe they can figure out what works well for them or their students. Or even as Jan said, the primary teachers used it a lot. And one of the things with Explain Everything is the interface can be a little harder for primary. So maybe something like Seesaw works better. Now there is a simpler interface now available on Explain Everything in the updated version, which seems to work a little bit better and is maybe a little more primary user friendly. But Seesaw could offer some different things, and it is also something that can be kept private and just privately shared with parents. So one of the things with Explain Everything, you could share it with individual parents and set up a portfolio, but you're kind of transferring everything from Explain Everything to maybe Google Drive and then somewhere else. And so it's all kind of mixed up, where in Seesaw it's a little more contained and might be easier to share. Now, some people have already gone on here, which is awesome. If not, if you wanted to start adding in some different ways that your students have shared their thinking and learning, and some of this may go with the assistive tech devices that we've shared, and some may be in different ways. So go ahead and share it in the text box about what your students have done. Crystal, I know for us that our board has gone through a bunch of different apps and have decided which ones we can use and which one we can't. Seesaw was one that was talked about. I don't think the board has come down with a definitive answer yet on if Seesaw can or can't be used. I know some people are currently using it, but they're just like with Class Dojo, which someone had mentioned before too. Initially, we could use it, and now we can't use it because of some privacy things. So sometimes the rules do change a little bit as people are trying to figure out in terms of student data and where things are getting saved. We also are lucky in our board that we have a blogging system that has been set up by some people in our board through the 21st Century Learning Department, and those are where my blogs, including my professional blog, actually is held. And it kind of deals with that whole issue of student privacy in terms of the collecting of data. It's a lot safer than maybe some of the other options for us because of the way in which it's been set up. So I don't know, this is something where you almost want to go like board by board and find out a little bit in terms of what their policies are, because even one of the things that you'll see if you check out some of my blogs is that our board, parents sign off of it on it, but our board does allow for us to share photographs and videos of students, which includes their faces, videos where we mention their names. These are all things that parents are signing off on. And so you'll see that those appear in my blog posts sometimes, although I do try to kind of limit it quite a bit, but they do sometimes appear. But these are things that other boards have said no to. So you do definitely want to check out with your IT department where that works. Yes. I totally agree, Crystal, and I'm glad that you made the comment as well, because apps and stuff can be expensive. The other thing is you can become very comfortable with using certain apps and tools, and then when you're told that you can't use it, it becomes a little more complicated. So it's totally worth digging in, asking either if you have a 21st century team, or if you have, you might even want to go to your administrator and find out what the rules are before you start figuring out what might or might not work. Okay, one of the things that I'm just seeing as people are sharing some stuff here is that while there are a large number of text tools, there are also a large number of tools that do not involve technology, which I think is wonderful too, because it's good to have some variety. And for some students, sometimes taking away some of the tech, or maybe even just taking a picture to share their work, but using the pencil paper option works better for them. And so it's nice to have a combination, and there are some really good tools that work well to share thinking and learning, like the RAND chart, for example. So it's nice that people are sharing both types of tools on here, because certainly when it comes to this kind of session and through OTF as well, there is kind of push or look in terms of some of the technology that's available, and it's certainly something as part of our board. I work in a school right now where all of our grade 4 to 8 students are one-to-one with iPads as part of our board's plan for transforming learning everywhere, and some of the younger students have already gotten other iPads, and there's iPads and computers in all of the classrooms. It's easy to just look at the tech options, but there are certainly some low-tech tools that can support learning as well, and sometimes can work really well for certain students as well. So it's nice to have the combination. And I'm seeing a few here that I don't know, like EdSpy, so I don't know if someone else has put one on, but anyways, it's nice to just see a few different ideas and things. And I know Weebly sites, but I haven't really used Wix a lot either. And Aretha, I agree with you. I totally love sticky notes. And every student I've ever taught seems to love them too. Either for drawing or writing ideas down, you get a lot when you give a child a sticky note. So there is some value in that too. And sometimes it's not necessarily about the tool that you're using, but the fact of providing a few different options in terms of how they share their thinking that works. So for some of them, the fact that they can draw their ideas down versus writing it can be really powerful. And for others, the fact that they can write it and that they can avoid some of the drawing stuff works well too. So there is some variety that certainly works with it. And sometimes they can draw it and put it into a tech tool and talk about it, and that works too. So there is some value. Well, that shadow puppet one, I was just playing with that the other day, but I haven't used it yet. So not with my students anyway. So thanks for the person who put that one in here too. Okay, I think we've got quite a few ideas. I'm going to move to the next slide, but if you have other ideas, just stick them in the chat box too, and then we won't lose any of them. Okay, so because This particular presentation is focused on the idea of inquiry for the struggling student. I'm also trying to look a little bit at what options might be available to students where they're struggling in different ways. And in one of these ways, it might be in something like writing. I've taught a number of students in different grades where writing is difficult. And so sometimes a digital storybook option works well. I happen to love and have used My Story before. There's a ton of different digital storybook ones. This is just one example, and you can see it actually embedded as part of this post. But we had gone to the Green Venture program, and we had learned all about worms and vermicomposting. We had brought back a vermicomposter, and the students were doing some research. And what they had to do is, after they had shared it, and in fact they made vermicomposters using different tools in the classroom to kind of explain and show their thinking about how it works. They had to use a tool of their own to explain it so that we could share with others about vermicomposting. And this was actually part of our Earth Day initiative for that year. And so as such, My Story was one that was used, and it was used in a lot of different ways. And you can actually see in this particular blog post a few different examples on how it was used, from basically reading text to really going beyond that and explaining thinking. So there is some variety, and it's nice to have those kinds of variety, and it will happen with your students as well. I also just want to make a note. I know Stephanie mentioned Lino, and Lino is wonderful. I've used it a lot. I didn't put it as part of this presentation, so I'm really glad, Stephanie, that you mentioned it. One of the things I really like about that particular tool as well, and that's why I'm going to stop, is that it's something where you have a few different options to share thinking as well. Students can take photographs of work, you can type things in, you can add a video or link or a picture. Like, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can share your thinking. So again, it provides a few different options. It's really easy to share, and you can embed it as part of a blog as well, so it's there for others to go back to or continue to add their ideas. You also have a little bit of control about privacy. So you can make it a private Lino wall, or you can open it up to the public. You can make it one where you have to get email approval before things, before notes and stuff are approved. So there's all kinds of different ways. It is totally one to check out, and it is one I used last year with my grade 1s as well. We used it on our own in grade 1. I also used it with our reading buddies in grade 1 to share some thinking about books. It is very similar to Padlet, which I really like as well. I don't really know that there's much of a difference. I find Padlet on the iPad, because it's through the internet, to be a little finicky, and Lino is an app, so it's a little easier. So that's the only thing that I really find is the difference for me, where, and so when I was using the iPad, I kind of like Lino as a better option. Lino also works on computers as well. So, and yes, it can be used on a laptop as well. You just go through the internet address, versus on the iPad there is an app for it. So there is a few different options. Padlet is awesome. Have used it before as well. Super easy to use, and I did use it last year. But one of the things I find is it's a little finicky when you're trying to do it on an iPad through the internet. So again, it depends on some personal preference with it too. The other thing is with Lino you can set some restrictions in terms of who sees it, and some people need to be logged in order to view your boards and things like that. So if you really want to keep it private to start, you have a little more control over that, where Padlet isn't quite the same with regards to that. So a little bit of a sidebar there, but it is one that's worth it, and it's totally a tool I would check out. Okay. So this is another example. Now this example was not one by me. This is a grade, she was a grade 7-8 teacher last year at our school. She's phenomenal. Her name is Frances Nicolaitis. She is an LTO teacher for our board, and she did a bunch of stuff with her students when it came to science, and this is just one example where they used Explain Everything, but in addition to the manipulatives. And I'm giving this example because as I have kind of mentioned, I do teach in an inner city school. We have a very high ESL population. Frances taught in a class where a large percentage of her students were part of what's called the Alpha program. So the Alpha students are only integrated back into the regular classroom for certain periods as part of the day, and for the rest of the day they are pulled out, and their students, a large number of them are refugees, they don't speak English, they're kind of immersed as kind of a self-contained program to really bring up the language skills. And so, and it's not even just that they're not speaking English, but in addition to it, you're dealing with students with extreme poverty, you're dealing with students who have been in, who are refugees, maybe they've been dealing with war and things like that. There's a lot going on there. So there's lots of different needs, and as such, some of the academic pieces are a struggle. And Frances used Explain Everything plus Real Manipulative all the time with her students in order to allow them to inquire in a meaningful way, but allow them to work in a way that worked for them. And this was a great example of that. So this is just the Twitter link to what she did, but she would put some questions up. She would allow them to use Explain Everything, and they could use that tool in whatever way worked for them. From writing to talking to sharing ideas, it was totally left for them. The other way is something like podcasting, and this is where I went back to that idea way back when it came to Vocaroo. It doesn't really matter what tool you use with it, but sometimes there is value in being able to just explain your thinking orally. And for some students, if you can take away the writing and just use this as a way to share thinking, you can really get a feel of what students know. This also comes not just as part of a small group, but this also has value as part of a large group. For instance, and this was an example of something that we did when I taught grade 5, and we were looking at government, and they were looking at parts of what makes a good speech because they were taking on different government roles as part of an inquiry that we were doing, and they were kind of trying to run for election as part of the classroom. And so we had looked at some government speeches and analyze them as part of a media text before students started to write their own in order to run as part of the classroom. So there was a lot of stuff going back and forth with this one. And what I really wanted to get at was what the students understood, and if they had got those key ideas of what makes a good speech before they went back to go and actually create their own speech. And so in this case, it wasn't important to spend the time to necessarily get everyone to write everything down, but there was value in getting them to speak out those ideas. And so I could get just as much data in terms of their understanding with an iPad. And I actually just stood there and at the front of the room, and I had my iPad going and I recorded it. And I used to record their thinking all the time. What I liked about this particular iPad app for podcasting is that I could upload it to either YouTube or to a board video service, and then I could share it. So it was really easy to include as part of our daily blog post too. And I agree with you, Becky, it does give a ton of confidence. And Arifa, thank you for sharing that about how the teacher records tests if they can't write well. I mean, that's an easy thing to do. I also know there's a teacher on Twitter, Zoe Brannigan Pipe, and she uses LiveScribe pens in exactly the same way. And you could use an iPad as well, but she's at ZB Pipe on Twitter. And she's done a lot of stuff with regards to the LiveScribe pen and recording the test. And one of the things with the LiveScribe that's kind of interesting, if you ever can get your hand on one of them, is that you can record it and just put like a dot on a regular test paper, and a student can be sitting there with a headset plugged in, listen to exactly what that dot says, plugged right into the pen, and then record their thinking on the pen and put it right back onto the paper. So, I mean, it's really quite an amazing tool. It looks just like a pen, but it has the audio capabilities that are really quite incredible. So, and there's a lot of apps, screencasting apps allow you to do a lot of the same things. But as Susan says, Yeah, I would agree. I think they're very underutilized. And in fact, I was thinking about that today because I have about 3 of them sitting in my room, and I know I don't use them as much now that I have iPads and stuff in the classroom as well. But for some students, not dealing with a screen and just seeing something like a pen, it becomes a lot less intimidating when you're dealing with some older students who maybe feel different because their friends might be writing a test using a pen or pencil, and now they're writing it on a computer. Something like an iPad provides, or something like a LiveScribe pen provides a lot of different options. So it is something, if you have any kicking around or you've used them before, they're way less expensive than some other forms of technology and are incredibly reliable and can be shared in many different ways. So it is something worth thinking about. Recording videos is another way as well, and this is where there's value in having different ways that students can share thinking. So earlier on, I showed you the picture of the students that had done the digital Storybook in order to share their thinking on worms. Well, in exactly the same day, this particular student, they showed their thinking with just recording a video, just using the camera. A simple way to share what they know, but seemed to work better for this particular group of students and to get more of their ideas down. And I think that's where all of this comes, is that these students may not all have, say, the writing skills, or they may not all have the reading skills, but they still have thinking skills. And so we need to be able to provide students with ways that they can share their thinking regardless of where there might be gaps in other areas. And blogging is another great way to do this. This is an example of a student. She was in my grade 5 class, and she shared her thinking about a government problem on a blog, and she actually got some feedback, some comments back from one of our trustees as well as our superintendent. So people were actually looking back and giving her some feedback, and so there was a meaningful audience for her work, which was one of the benefits of something like blogging. But in addition, she felt more comfortable. She was not a student that liked to necessarily stand up and talk in front of a class, but she was a student that had a lot of great ideas to share. And so she was able to share those ideas in a way that worked well for her. And that's why there is, again, that value in having those different options. And I also said here about not forgetting about the arts, because even if you don't teach the arts, and that was true of this particular year, the arts are a wonderful instructional strategy. And so in this particular case, I was teaching grade 5, and we were learning about the human body, and students had gotten into groups, and they had decided that they were going to create different organ systems, and we were going to have our big body bonanza, and we invited a bunch of classes from around the school to come up and learn about the organ systems from us. So the students had made it. They were going to teach them about the organ systems, and one of the things they were going to do is I coupled with our music teacher who taught the students about doing soundscapes and exploring found sounds, and she set up a whole bunch of different things in her room for them to use. And then what the students did with us is they had to create a sound that went with their organ system and be able to explain the thinking behind it. So they played it as part and explained it as part of their little mini presentation. They had a lot of fun with this. They really explored sounds well. This one is very well done, but it is a neat one to listen to, and it was actually redone afterwards at one point because they had found out other things about the body, and they decided to go back and make some changes as well. So again, a different way to share thinking, but one that really kind of appealed to a large number of students. And as I said, there is nothing wrong with paper, and that was the idea before. We do look at a lot of different technology that's available, but for some students, being able to write their thing down works well. That's the best way of being able to share it. And with something like a photograph, you can still capture it and share it with others and get that thinking out there. And while some students may be struggling in writing, for other students, they may struggle in something like speaking to others. And I've taught a number of students who are selective mutes, and they really do find it difficult to communicate orally, either as part of a small group or a large group in many situations, but they can communicate well in writing. And so the ability to be able to write that down and share in that way works well for them, and it is an option that I think is worth exploring when it comes to looking at sharing whatever knowledge students have gained through the inquiry that they might be working on. And this goes in with it is that everything can be shared well on a blog afterwards. And on all the different blogs that I've shared, or at least all the different class ones, and I did this for grade 5 as well, but I do have a daily shoot blog post. So every day we put together all the tweets and videos and things that have gone out and some information to kind of explain the thinking behind the day, and that goes out to parents. And so then parents can extend that learning at home, and that becomes incredibly beneficial for all students. But I think is especially beneficial for some of our struggling students, because when parents can speak about some of the learning that's happened in the classroom, they can also help go back again, review, explain again, listen to, answer questions of some of those students. And so that has some benefit when those students come back the next day and continue the learning that they might have even gotten it in a different way when it's been explored or explained at home. I would often also, and I still do that now, maybe let parents know about something that's happening the next day. So again, you're allowing them at home to be able to build some prior knowledge that will help that student when they're back in the classroom. And again, that has a lot of value too. Somebody here also mentioned the idea of a small whiteboard could be useful in a situation when it comes to a student who may be a selective unit doesn't want to talk. I totally agree. They can write down ideas as well. I've also used online back chat, something like a Today's Meet, which works really well for some students. And when I taught grade 6, one of my students who never spoke at school was like the moderator of the Today's Meet. She would always ask questions back and forth. She would almost like text back and forth. She could ask questions of her peers, or she'd send me a message to let me know if she had a question, which was a great way to share it. When it comes to parent engagement, I'm going to say at all of the schools I have worked in, I have not run into problems with parent engagement, but I do think that there's value in getting to parents in different ways and finding out what works well for parents. And that's why I think that that comes down a little bit to offering a few different options. So when you said about the parents being tech challenged, not everyone has technology at home. Totally agree. I speak to parents a lot. I call parents every week. I talk to them outside when when the students pick up at the end of the day, when they pick up their child. I might send home a paper with an idea or a question on at the end of the day. I've also seen a really neat idea that was in a book that and in fact, if I taught kindergarten in a room where I could actually post it up, I totally would. But where they just wrote a few different highlights of the day, printed it off, and put it on the window so that the parents could read it and talk about it at the end of the day. And that was a neat thing for them. You might even send the child home with a question to talk about, like just cutting it out and handing it to the child so that parents can talk about the question. Here's a little talking point for tonight, and that works well. The other thing too is that while in my current school, I worried about the fact that we would have access to all of the technology that's available because I do teach in a lower income area. I was surprised to find out how many parents actually did have access through their phones. And so in fact, this year I actually do have all of my students having access to technology at home in some way. So that was one of the things too. So again, it's giving them some options. That's why I also put Storify stories on the blog, but I also tweet them out. I have some parents that follow the Twitter account. They look at what's happening all day. I have a couple parents that even tweet back some questions and stuff for their child so their child knows that they're looking at it. But I have others who just look at the stuff that goes on the blog. We have to be able to figure out a way to get that information to parents. And sometimes it means some of the old school ways, talking to them, printing something off that we can hand to them, even writing a question of the day that goes home in an agenda that parents could talk about with your child at home. So you could even have your child, depending on the grade, copy it in or take a photograph of it or send it to them that tells them a question to discuss at home that night. And in some ways, it is that idea of building up some of that schema for some of our students so that the next day they can come back and have more to share. It's allowing parents to be part of the process, which I think is so important as well. But it also allows the student, especially your struggling student, to get a chance to review that material, articulate it again to somebody else at home, and maybe get some of their questions answered that they might not even think about having them answer during the day. Yeah, it is hard with printing stuff off. I will say, last year what I used to do is I used to send something home once a week for parents. So I would look at, I wouldn't print everything off. I would just tell them that I would kind of highlight the main points and send some of that stuff home. Maybe a few pictures of stuff their child was doing, plus some of the key things that were happening. And if we had a really big question that I thought was important for them to talk about, then I would send home that each night. So that seemed to help well too. But you have to figure out something that works for you and for them, and it is often a lot of back and forth talking too. Yeah. And Susan, I agree with you. As I said, I currently teach in the lowest socioeconomic area of our board, the lowest socioeconomic school in our board, and in my current classroom, I don't have any students that don't have access, parents don't have access to the internet. Lots through phones, most of them have mobile phones, but they still have access. And I agree, paper does become a little bit problematic. One of the things that I found if I have to send home paper is I fold it up and I get them to put it in their lunch bag. And then at the end of the day, the parents are opening up the lunch bags to make new lunches, and then they see the paper that's there. So there are those options, and I totally agree. A lot of them have the phone, and a lot of blogs, and mine's one of them, where there is actually options to make it look a little more user-friendly on the phones and things like that. So it's a little bit easier, because I will admit the large number of my parents who access it do access it through a phone, not through the computer. Okay, so after a lot of talking from me, how can you help scaffold the learning for students that need it? So I'm thinking about the fact that for some children, it is a challenge when they're given a lot of information, maybe for an inquiry project, they're reading a lot of text. And so what are some things that we can do to help scaffold that learning for them so they can be more successful? Oh, wonderful. Chunking. Okay. Oh. Brand chart. I love the multiple entry points. Excuse me. Oh, thanks to the person who put the link in there about the KWHLAW one. I've seen some variations on KWL charts, but I don't think I've seen one that has that many options with it. So thank you. Okay. Do apologize here. Sorry for the coughing. Sorry. It's through the languages blog. I think on this one your mouse actually can click over it and that link is active. So even if you can't see the actual address, if you scroll your mouse over top of it, at least for me it looks like I can actually click on that link. So you could probably do the same too if you want. Yes. Thanks, Stephanie. Perfect. In that particular case, it looks like it did. Excellent. Okay, so thank you to everyone who's given some ideas already. The majority on this page here, there are a few ideas in the chat box as well. I know that there's some more ideas here than what I've added in my slides too, but by all means, if other ideas come up or you see some different connections that you think of, please add them in the chat box. This group has been awesome for chatting and giving some ideas along, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you. So one of the things was the idea of building schema. So it's really important, I think, for some of our media students to be able to give them some background information so that they can ask questions, they can wonder more, because you can't get into a true inquiry unless you have something to inquire about. And I've really noticed that this year with my current group of kindergarten students as well. It's taken us until about this point in the year where we can actually get into an inquiry because students have built up enough background knowledge to start to ask questions. At the beginning of the year, between September and like now, beginning of February, we had about 4 questions that were asked all year long. And so now that they have information, they have stuff to ask, and now I can't stop them with asking questions. And that's true of any grade. That's not just true of kindergarten. And especially as you get into some of the more complex subject areas. Like for instance, when I taught grade 5 and we were dealing with the government had issues. Well, my students didn't know anything about the government issues, so they had nothing to wonder about. So we spent probably 2 weeks like reading newspapers, looking through videos, online research, all kinds of stuff on key subject areas, and just reading and talking. And that's how we spent like almost 2 weeks of time reading, talking, asking more questions, going back, re-exploring issues. And it wasn't about writing questions down. It was just about getting to those key details so that all of a sudden the students had enough background information to be able to inquire. And one of the things that I really found useful was setting up Pinterest boards. So this was one example. I know Susan's already put the link in here, and you can actually see all of the different Pinterest boards that I've had in the past. But I went and I collected a bunch of resources, and I tried to collect them considering the needs of my different students. So I got some videos, I got some online content, I got some stuff that, like in terms of written text, that was a little more complicated, and I got some easier ones, and I tried to put some information in there to let students know how difficult the text would be. So that way, when they were clicking on it, they would know if it was something that they could read and understand. Sometimes I would gear certain students towards certain text. Other times they just kind of explored on their own. They knew what a video looked like, so they knew they could click on it. And we went right in. I used to just write the address for the particular Pinterest board. They would type it in, they click on it. You could use a QR code as well. It totally depends on the grade. And then from there, they could access it and just spend time finding out about the information before we dug deeper. And conversations are another great way. And again, this is an option other than Pinterest. This is inquire. Brian Aspinall, who's done some webinars, he just did one the other day through here as well. He's Mr. Aspinall on Twitter. He is the person behind inquire. He set it up. It is very similar in nature to Pinterest. But again, it's probably, if you're looking a little bit when it comes to that safety piece, it just becomes that much easier. It's also set up by a teacher. He knows what it's like in the classroom. And I used this last year with my grade 1 students, and they found it really easy. So I found the images that we wanted. They clicked on those particular images. They had some stuff to talk about when it came to structures. They found out a little bit about it. They could talk to other people in the class, as well as to some older students too, and then they were able to dig a little bit deeper. The Padlet idea too that you have with the Canadians, that's a wonderful idea as well. No, I don't have students set up on Pinterest account. That Pinterest board is open. So all they did is in the internet browser, they would type in pinterest.com/adunsiger, and they could see all the boards that I had. It was a school one, so it's just for professional boards. I don't have personal things set up on it. Or I would give them the specific room. So I might say, you know, pinterest.com/adunsiger/government or whatever. They would type it in, they could find it, and they could access it. You could also create a QR code for it if you wanted, and they could access it for them. Yes, Pinterest is 13 and older. I did not have kids set it up. They did not need a board in order to actually access the links that were there. So it worked fine without them actually being logged in. Oh, I didn't need to log in. I don't know if that's a newer thing or not. I will admit I didn't use Pinterest with my grade 1s last year. So I don't know if something's changed with regards to it, but I didn't. Now, I mean, one of the things you could always do, I guess, is I was using school devices. I guess you could log into your account on each of those devices, and then when they access it, they would be fine. At home, maybe through their parents, they could. But it would depend. The query, though, is for students. It does the same thing as Pinterest. So instead of setting up a Pinterest board, you can go through the query, and you can keep it private, or you can get a public link to it. So it could be an option if that 13-piece weighs in. Even if you don't have as much technology, not everything needs to be through the technology. Sean, someone had said here about a center to set up. That's a great idea. Let the kids listen to it and gain access to some of the information there. Also, in addition to the online resources, I also brought in things like newspapers, books, and so you could have, you know, some people that are accessing it through a computer, some people that are accessing it through an iPad, some people that are reading and looking and talking about pictures in books or articles in newspapers, and then you switch around. And so everyone gets a chance to do it from there, or as someone else had suggested, have it set up as like part of a center and people rotate there through the course of a week. There are some options. The other thing is, depending on how they're accessing it, you don't need to have a one-to-one. If they're just looking to talk and read a little bit about some issues, there's some value in having even 3 or 4 people with an iPad, because when they're doing it that way, there's some discussion that's happening, and depending on the content, there is some value in having that kind of discussion. I didn't know this Currents for Kids one, so Jan, thank you for putting that one down. I have not heard of that one. before. So now I want to go and check it out when this is done too. A task analysis works well too. I did have a student with autism as part of my classroom, and she could certainly access the information, but just having an open-ended question didn't work for her. She needed something a lot more specific. So I would write down a specific set of tasks for her to do, and she would check it off as she went. So she'd go through, she'd find the information, she'd write it down, she'd move to the next task. And it went all the way through until she checked that she was done. And then that way I didn't have to spend every 2 minutes reprompting her in terms of what she needed to do. She was able to follow through. I was able to sit down, see what she was doing, and go back to it. And I will admit I had another student in the class who did not have autism, but did find that the open-ended nature of the task could become a little overwhelming for him. He needed a little more support to know what to look for. And so I created a task analysis for him to do, and it was a little more open-ended than hers because he could do a little more open-ended. But it might say something like, visit 2 websites, get 3 points from each one, write the points down, write 6 sentences or 5 sentences sharing what you've done, and really set up to get to the bottom. So again, I wasn't spending my entire time with one student. He could go through, he could act independently, he could access the information, he could get the ideas down. I could still circulate and work with the other students, and then I could still go and sit and check with him and see where he was. He liked the feeling of independence. I liked the idea too that he was able to access a little bit more on his own, and I could also support some other students in the classroom and not have a student who at the end didn't have anything accomplished or done or wasn't able to become a part of that learning because he was able to. Guided groups also work really well. There is the author in here the author of 100 Minutes, and I'm trying, Lisa is her first name, and I'm trying to think of her last name now. It is totally escaping me. Thank you, Lisa Donahue. She's amazing. She was the one who gave me this idea with guided groups. So when a couple years ago, when our Ontario social studies curriculum changed and we were moving more towards an inquiry focus, she was trying to figure out what that might look like in her grade 6 classroom. And so what she did is she introduced it with guided groups. So she had them reading something that was connected to a bigger topic of study, and then from there they might look at maybe a YouTube video as part of the small group that had something to do with that topic, generate some questions, and then that guided group then took off in terms of some more independent follow-up. So, and I really think that it's important to have this. First of all, in grade 5 and 6, I had a lot of students that didn't want to come to guided reading, as did she. But they loved guided reading when that was including something that they were interested in, when they were asking some questions, where I could also provide a little more of a push in terms of digging deeper into some of the questions that they had, in terms of scaffolding a little bit when it was needed, and then having them follow up with it. So it's kind of like introducing them to what inquiry was all about as part of a small group. Yeah. Well, one of the things for the person who asked about the searches online. So we did do a little bit of, we did a few mini lessons in terms of how to search online. Sorry, we also did some lessons in terms of looking at internet addresses and trying to figure out by looking at the internet address if it might be something that is appropriate or not appropriate for them to look at. And yes, digital citizenship is so important. And you know what? Honestly, I've had grade 1s and 2s Google search as well on Google. So we did take a big look in terms of that. We talked about, when you're looking at things like images and videos, you've got to be careful, and sometimes there are things that are inappropriate, and if they are, you know what, you're not watching it or you're not looking at it, you can let the teacher know. I was always looking at screens when kids were having a look at things, so I was aware in terms of what they were doing. One of the things I also really liked is that's why I liked using the Pinterest pages. That's why I liked using an inquiry, because I could go through and almost do some research in advance for kids. So I knew that those were sites that had accurate information. I knew that those were sites that were safe for children, and then I knew that that was a good starting point. And then when students needed more, I could even sit down as part of a small group and we could do some searches together. So again, I could scaffold a little bit in terms of what those searches might be like, and we could look a little bit at search terms. We could go through and look at some of the website addresses that were there, and I had a better feeling in terms of the stuff that they were accessing. But the truth is, even my kindergarten students, many of which cannot read and write, all know how to find YouTube videos, and they all are finding them. And so it's important to be able to share with them how to do so safely. And those digital citizenship stuff is great, and you might want to do some digital citizenship lessons online. There's a whole bunch of good ones that are available online as well. And yes, the query does allow for bookmarking, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually haven't used that part of it, but it does allow for you to actually submit a link that could go as part of the bookmark. So it would also allow, again, even at home with parents, that you could go and do some Google searches, find some information, put it in, and then other people would be able to access it too. Okay, I have it for Jan as well. I haven't seen that TC2.ca one, that link with the Canadian or the Ontario curriculum. Now I'm really interested in looking at that one too. So thank you, Jan, for mentioning that. So again, there's you can see even from what's being shared here, there's tons of different ideas of what people have tried and done, and it is a lot of playing with it. And depending on the group, that's awesome. I have so not seen that, but I'm very, very interested in looking at it now. Okay, so now that we've got all these great ideas and things, and this is where this whole idea of having students that are all at different points becomes a little more complicated, because now we're looking at assessment and evaluation. So what might assessment and evaluation look like if the final product varies for each student? And I think this is a topic that comes up all the time. And I'd love to hear what other people think on this topic. I have shared a few different ideas on the coming slides, but I think this is one that comes up a lot, especially when we're looking at trying to support some of our struggling learners, is we still have to assess them. Success criteria. I agree with you about assessing the thinking and learning when we have those different products. But I do know that the question is always, how do we do it when we have so many different products? How do we use the same? How do we use the same assessment or evaluation? So it is interesting, but I would agree with your comment. You can. Oh, I'm glad someone mentioned Mark Barnes. The book Role Reversal is a wonderful one. If you haven't read it, I totally would. I totally would have a look at it. but I haven't seen assessment 3.0 before, but I do love role reversal. I might need to look at that one too. Role reversal is one of his earlier books. I read a couple of his books, but it deals a lot with in terms of assessment and in terms of inquiry and letting students lead a little bit more of their learning and the role that they play in assessment and evaluation as well. It's awesome. We'll triangulate assessment. That's a great idea too. Student self-peer, love it. Well, thanks for putting down the links there. I totally need to read the one for descriptive feedback from Mark Barnes. Okay, so be cognizant of slides, or of time, I should say. I will move on a little bit. But again, keep adding to the chat window because it's been great. And many of you mentioned this in terms of learning goals and success criteria. I think that's kind of the way to start with it. So that regardless of where we're at, knowing that we're still trying to meet that same goal. And with our success criteria, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from one of my previous vice principals. She used to be a curriculum consultant. She's amazing. She's on Twitter. I'm just going to put her username in here. Her name is Christy Curie Bishop. She writes a wonderful blog as well. But one of the things is that she talked about is that the learning goal comes from the overall expectations, and the success criteria comes from the specifics. And then from there, you can develop anchor charts, which can include a checklist. Excuse me. Where this idea becomes really beneficial, I think, is when students are producing some different pieces of work, because your overall expectation, your learning goal is not going to change because you still want them to learn the same piece of information. The specific expectations, again, are not changing. That's curriculum. So what you can do, those I can statements, the success criteria can remain the same, but you can then break some of those things apart and create anchor charts for the different types of things that they're going to produce. So if students are going to produce a video, what are some key components to add? If they're going to produce a poster, what are some key components to add? If they're going to be writing something down, what are some key components to add? Because those are just the formats in which they're sharing it, but those are not all of the expectations. I think that has a lot of different value to it, and it's helped me a lot as I've been trying to kind of figure this piece out with all the different products that we tend to get. And I think those opportunities to share and question are really, really important. Even if we are writing things or producing things in different ways, when we start to share and question, we kind of get a feel of what students know and what areas are difficult for them. And when it comes to assessment, again, it's not just about that final mark, right? It's the assessment for learning as well. So this part, these discussion areas that we have, are also really important when it comes to the assessment for learning piece, because it tells us where are some of the confusing things? What are some of the things the children aren't getting? And how can I go and help support that? And so I certainly found this piece to be really beneficial for me, and that's why I did try to create some anchor charts together with the class, as we had a chance to do even 5 minutes of discussion at the end. And we would go back and we would add back to the ideas that we had shared before. And again, that told me what they knew, how their thinking had changed, what they now wonder, and we could go from there. And maybe what more information or what mini lessons do I have to have based on where some confusion lies. Now, one of the things that I've tried to do in the past that have worked was I did try to create rubrics based on the overall expectations. So again, the expectation piece isn't going to change. So I'd have the different parts of the rubric. This was one of the ones for our understanding of organ systems. It didn't change. How the students presented the information may have changed. And so they could still be evaluated in that same way. And so with that in mind and kind of looking a little bit at our time and where we're at, I hope that when all is said and done, people have learned some new things tonight, either from me and what was shared here, but also from all the amazing stuff that was shared in the chat. I know that I'm certainly lucky to feel like I've learned some new things, including some new sites that I want to go back to and explore. And so I just wanted to know, if you wanted to use the text tool or put something in here, what are some of the things that, something new you've learned tonight, and what's something that you might plan on trying? And then maybe that can help kind of gauge next steps. Guided groups, task analysis. Apps. There's tons of resources, and I have to thank everybody who is putting stuff into the chat window. I don't think I've done a lot of these online presentations before, but this chat window had some awesome stuff that was put into it. It was sometimes hard to keep up with all of the good ideas and all the links, but thank you everybody for sharing yours, because I think this gives even more ideas. Awesome. That's awesome to hear, Darcy. Thank you. Oh, to query. I love that. And Brian Aspinall, he's at Mr. Aspinall on Twitter. And if you're not following him along, or if you are on Twitter, the one thing I love about Query as well is he's tried to set it up for you. So if there's questions, like Query used to all be private. You couldn't access a public board. And I told them that I really liked that. I love Query, but I wanted to be able to put the link up the board on my blog. I wanted the parents to be able to access it at home. It was becoming complicated for kids to sign in. So by the end of the day, he had created an option for a public site as well. So again, what's awesome about him is if you have questions or there's something you wish you had, you can go back again and ask him, and he will totally make changes based on your feedback. That's awesome. Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Jeff. Oh, thanks, Sarah, for sharing your Twitter name as well. If other people in here want to share it too, then you've got some more people that you can follow and learn from, because there's certainly lots of people here with awesome ideas. Yeah. The other way of thinking it, when someone had mentioned about guided groups outside of the inquiry literacy block, when it comes to inquiry, that idea of time is a huge one, and you can really maximize the time when you think in terms of larger blocks of time. And I've noticed this a lot with going back to FDK, but I really got the idea before when I taught grade 5. And one of the things to look at was we really broke our day where half of it was language and half was math, and science, social studies, the arts, everything was embedded as part of those days. There were large blocks of time to spend with kids. The guided groups that we had might have fallen into a literacy / social studies / science time, writing and stuff. Again, mini lessons were based on those other content areas, and we were able to dig a lot deeper and spend a lot more time looking at it. And again, you can see like stuff like guided reading can still happen during a day, regardless of if you're looking at it as your language time or your like social studies or science time. Oh, I love Explain Everything. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. Oh, excellent. I'm glad everyone put it on there. For everyone who has their Twitter. Thanks, Shelley. Oh, yeah. I don't pay attention to bells. Oh, thank you. Thanks, everybody who came. There's probably, I know a lot of people are left or leaving. If you do have any questions or concerns that you still have and you want to add it in, please do. Thanks, Cheryl. Probably a little less talking would be good.
So, Aviva, it's after 9. Are you hoping, oh, you still have the next slide is up there. Okay.
You know what? This was the only one. I think a lot of people are leaving now on that.
Yeah, and I
think a lot of these questions and concerns have been answered anyway.
Yeah,
so.
I agree. So, yeah, I just wanted to catch folks before, who I know we've missed a few people, but and just say a thank you, and I want to share these links in the chat as well. These 2 links on this page are in fact active. So if you click on the first one, that's the evaluation for tonight's session, and OTF is very grateful for your feedback after these sessions. Not only does it help them to drive future planning, but it also helps to drive their funding because they provide statistics and information back to the ministry, and it really helps them. So please do the evaluation. It doesn't take very long. It's really important. There's been so much shared tonight. Aviva's opening line on her Twitter account is, quote, "Teaching is my passion." And Aviva, I was just looking at it tonight. You realize, I'm sure you do, you have tweeted 133,000 times. I think that's about as much as like some of the, big stars that, anyway, you're...
Apparently I talk a lot.
Yeah, no, Aviva not only does amazing things, but shares it so openly and willingly in so many platforms. So we learned so much from you tonight, Aviva. Thank you so much. And I want to reiterate what you said about the participants and their sharing as well. So many great ideas on those screens and also in the chat area. There have been a few of you that have asked about how do we get access to all of this. When you close out of the session, there will be an email that comes very soon afterwards, if not by tomorrow morning, that will be a list of all of the resources. So this entire thing has been recorded, including everything happening in the chat and everything that was on the screen, and your contributions to many of the text boxes. And it's fully recorded, and you can play it back and fast forward to your favorite parts after the session. That's one of the really lovely things about this whole series. I'm going to go ahead to the next slide because there are some great sessions coming up. And there was a link that I posted in the chat just a while ago. I'm going to do it again to the OTF Connects calendar. So I've just put them to the end of next week on this slide. But there's great sessions coming. It's a full house until the end of May. And in fact, there will be some nights, Monday to Thursday, where we're doubling up and doing 2 sessions because there are so many great presenters. And they have just received new funding to do some extra math and technology sessions. So there will be some additions to the schedule in the next couple of weeks. So if you have already looked at it and signed up for things coming up, I would recommend that in the next few days you check again because there will be some additions. So once again, to all of you for coming and giving up an evening during a very busy report card season, thank you so much. I know it was very beneficial. And Aviva, thank you very much for a really rich session. Your resources are all your own, I noticed. Articles and blog posts and things. That's a pretty incredible body of work that you have. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording now. That doesn't mean you all have to leave. As Aviva said, if you have some other questions, you can hang around. So I'm going to turn off the recording